Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to everyone. So this is the first of the WSET's 20-minute interviews, hopefully the first of many. My name is Nick, and I've worked for WSET for quite a while now, and my responsibility is I'm in charge of all of our spirits qualifications. So that's who I am. And today it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Barney Wilczak. Now I'm just going to say Barney from now on because I'm not the best with pronunciations. So now Barney works for Capreolus Distillery, which is a lovely distillery in the Cotswolds, and mostly making fruit spirits, but he also makes a gin which is called Garden Swift. Now this isn't going to be a super kind of geek out session. What we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of Barney and sort of his journey into distilling and some of his passions behind it and some of sort of his views of how he can work in the context of spirits and what he sees his roles being. But I think there may be some of you out there who would really like to sort of get into the nuts and bolts of this, then just make lots of noise in the comments. I'm sure that's a possibility. And we'll see if we can arrange another conversation about the intricacies of fruit distillation. Now, that's what we're going to head into. If there are any questions, you can leave some questions down below. We're not sure if we're going to have time because I'm on a strict time limit. So I'm not sure I'm going to have too much time. But if we don't answer any of your questions that you pose in the chat during this, we will make sure that afterwards we follow up and we do answer those questions. So you won't be left hanging. Right then, so welcome Barney. And Barney, as you can see, you're in the distillery. So what have you been up to today? I guess you're distilling as it's fruit season.
I am, yeah, we're absolutely full speed at the moment. So today we've been distilling, you can tell I'm tired already, our Seaguar grape skins, which is an incredible cross between Gewürztraminer and Madeleine Angevine. So it smells like fresh lychee and rosewater in here.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, that is a particularly aromatic grape variety, and one that was, I think, particularly kind of crossed for this kind of very North European and sort of the British climate where it could actually ripen, which historically was a challenge, certainly. Okay. Now, as you can see, Barney's in his distillery, but you haven't been a distiller all of your working life, and I think that's one of the interesting things, because I remember when I first kind of looked at your website and stuff, and I was like, wow, you've got some pretty damn impressive pictures on here. I mean, you must have spent a fortune on that. But it turns out that actually they're your photographs, because in a previous life you were a photographer. So what got you into, what was that part of your life like? What got you into photography?
It was a kind of fascinating thing. You know, I've grown up where the distillery was where I was brought up from a baby. This is the old lean-to greenhouse where I used to shoot the panes of glass out with air pistols and all the naughty things a child did. But it's an incredible area for natural history, and I was always fascinated kind of with the natural world. So I went into 5 AS levels of science and decided, you know what, I'd rather spend more time in the field actually looking at things than I would in a lab. And I'd kind of had this interest in photography as well. So I was very lucky that I could spend time traveling the world with some of the most kind of renowned scientists worldwide, indulge that kind of passion for botany and, you know, these amazing animals, and kind of work with people that make my knowledge of natural history look terrible. And I think, you know, it's that thing where we were talking about this before, where people say, well, you know, that transition from photography to distilling is quite a step, and I think I'm preempting you here, Nick.
You are preempting me a little bit, but yeah. But I just wanted to have a little bit more about this before we get to that, which I think is a really interesting transition. So you were photographing around the world, but it was mostly all kind of natural, sort of like animals and plants.
So focused on conservation photography, so a lot on habitat restoration. So the last big project I did was building a media library for a group of botanic gardens in 118 countries and providing a free of use media library so that they could actually have photos of habitat restoration on 6 continents, which was a pretty good
wow.
to get.
Yeah.
But you know, for me, it was incredible. I got to work in looking at habitat restoration in places like Kenya and on the Burmese border in China, Australia, in the UK, in the Millennium Seed Bank, which is an amazing place to work.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And just seeing that, you know, kind of this engagement where, for me, photography was a portal where I could interact with these things I was incredibly excited about, and things that, you know, I guess concerned me or worried me and that I wanted to be a part of. But, you know, it was something I really loved doing, and I spent a huge amount of time doing it. But it's a fascinating thing. But there comes a point where I wanted to spend more time with my partner, Hannah. I wanted to be able to watch the garden grow here and have a dog, which I couldn't do, having always
no, fair enough. So it was almost the reality of sort of you can only travel for so long, and it's kind of time I want to sort of set down into a place, and rather than being this kind of itinerant person who's all over, to really make a mark in that one place.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's a really funny thing, kind of photography and distilling. People kind of, you know, especially fruit distilling, people say, well, this is a kind of huge jump in disciplines. And I always say, well, actually, no, it's not, because, you know, in photography, you have all of this kind of technical resource in the back of your head that you try and forget about. It becomes muscle memory. But you actually have to put yourself in this position where you are looking at these incredible experiences, you're placing yourself in these incredible moments. And this kind of technical knowledge in the back of your head is allowing you to capture that in a way that helps you to interpret it and express what you want and express what that moment is. Well, actually, distilling is exactly the same thing. You know, we have all of this stuff in the back of our heads, but actually what we're trying to do is capture this absolute peak moment, this kind of apogee of a year's worth of kind of growth and production, to capture something which kind of can, sorry, I'm about to become mystical, but I was going to say transport you back to the orchards where you grew up, or transport you back to a landscape or a point in a year, or, you know, that entire year caught up in one fruit.
Well, I think that's a very interesting comparison that you make there, in that there's an awful lot of technicality in distilling. Now, I'm a little bit more familiar with that. My father-in-law is a keen photographer, and he has tried on occasions to explain to me about stops and this, that, and the other. I get horribly confused. So, but I can, from a distilling side, I can very much imagine that it's you've got all these choices, this way in which you can operate, and actually all of that is in service of kind of an aim, of an aspiration. Obviously, with the photographer, it's the picture. With you now as a distiller, it's the Eau de Vie. So you'd been traveling the world, you come back to the Cotswolds. And by the way, if anyone hasn't been to the Cotswolds, please, I mean, it's just one of the best parts of the UK. It really is a beautiful part of the world. And so you kind of got involved with, particularly with fruit spirits. Now, is that because it was very much just the local crop, that there was a lot of fruit there, and that was something that attracted you, or were there other reasons why you particularly went for fruit? Because fruit, for those of you who don't know, they are incredibly difficult raw materials to work with. They can be quite challenging. So you obviously made not the easiest of choices there, but I think from you, knowing you as I do, this comes from a much deeper sense of like what I'm trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Well, you know, you're right. The Cotswolds, the west of England, is probably one of the great areas for kind of fruit breeding historically in Europe. Hundreds of pears and apples and plums here, you know, and I kind of grew up with those varieties around me. But, you know, when I was younger, I started playing about with making things like cider, very traditional here, but doing things like, you know, method champenoise and reduced nutrient fermentations. And it was a kind of small step to then go, well, actually, what happens if I start distilling these things? And what I instantly found was it's not easy. you know, these things are the most unforgiving things to distill possible. It took me 10 years work until I felt anywhere near happy of practice. But, you know, 6 or 7 years of that was as a hobby before I went professional. So I spent my time sat at home translating Austrian textbooks and Eastern European scientific papers and Italian books and French books, which kind of sums up the kind of person I am, I guess. And,
well, yeah, and I think it's just, if I just, for those of you who maybe don't know the context of fruit distilling, particularly in Europe, the real centre of it is the Germanic speaking parts of the world, Eastern Europe and Northern Italy, which is why there is very little written on this in English. So it's why Barney was having to go to these texts, because that's where the information, that's where the expertise was and in many senses is. So sorry.
No, absolutely. And, you know, what's interesting is, coming from an arts background, we kind of talk about developing your own practice. And actually, over the last 12 or 13 years, for me, we've kind of, because we have no context, no one else does this in the UK. And we, you know, we're very lucky with the kind of reception worldwide, you know, from other places that produce these. But actually, it's had to be a way that I've had to develop it. But I really remember a few years ago smelling one of our Eaux de Vie for the first time. And, you know, as I'd kind of been distilling, I realized that every apple you worked with, every pear you worked with, every plum you worked with was completely different. But I remember a few years ago smelling a Eaux de Vie for the first time, and I couldn't just smell the fruit. What I could smell is standing under those 300-year-old trees in that orchard. Because these pears have huge stalks, they're a tiny fruit. This is what we kind of make cider with, the pear equivalent of cider around here. Big pips. And suddenly you were smelling greenwood and ripewood and autumnal leaves, and you were smelling the landscape. It sounds very kind of far-fetched, but the way we work, where we only work from natural sugar, and you'll see that a lot of producers working with berries or quinces, for example, will just be soaking them in neutral alcohol. This takes 0.5 kilo to 3 kilos to make a litre of eau de vie. We only work from the natural sugar and wild fermentation, and we're using up to 45 kilos of fruit to make 1 litre.
Which for context is insane. I mean, that's a huge amount of fruit for that, and the yields on this, if you went to a Scottish whisky distillery and you sort of gave them your yield figures, they'd probably go.
So, you know, let's kind of do a comparison. Whiskey distillation, you're looking at 4,500 litres of pure alcohol out of a ton of barley. For something like raspberries, we're looking at 14 on average.
Yeah.
So, kilogram of fruit in a 25 ml measure. But this elevation, this compression, you know, which really got hold of me, was we're not just tasting these facsimiles of fruit flavour or these essences that taste like confectionery. We're tasting things that start elevating flavours that taste like the plant and the tree. You know, our blackcurrant eau de vie smells like you've pushed your hand through those leaves. You're taking that fruit, and as you eat it, you're nosing that aroma of leaves on the back of your hand. And for me, this was kind of this magical moment where these things are not about making alcohol, they're about preserving these absolute perfumes and essences. And I think, you know, what people need to understand is something like whiskey, you're getting lots of fermentation flavors, you're getting lots of barrel flavors. Yes, you're getting that malt influence, but our raspberry eau de vie, 20 mils of that will have more raw material in it than an entire bottle of aged whiskey.
Yeah.
So they're loudspeakers for not only the fruit, but the terroir in which they're grown. We only work within 50 miles, so it's very unique maritime climate. And, you know, for me, you can see it grabs me, and
yeah, no, absolutely
fascinated by it.
And it is one of the things that I for those of you who know me, like the legend that is Billy Abbott, people will know that I profoundly love these fruit spirits, and it's very much for the reasons that you've said, that when they're done well, and when they're done very well, you aren't just getting a flavor of a fruit like his raspberry. There is this nuancing within it, and it's not just in the immediacy of your kind of tasting it, but it's it's over quite often quite extraordinary length and persistence of flavour as well. And I've never, I suppose the only other spirit that I kind of maybe have a good enough working relationship with, kind of feel that there's kind of an equivalence in terms of for this fruit, maybe might be sort of the unaged agave spirits, where the ones that are made with enormous attention to detail have, I think, a very similar sense of that kind of nuance of the raw material. Now, that's not to say that, you know, aging and all the other processes which are able to generate great spirits aren't valid in their own way. It's just there's something particularly, I think, unique about fruit spirits. With that in mind, and also with kind of what's really special about fruit spirits, I mean, you are currently in your distillery, and it is as big as it looks, i.e. not very. Do you think it is high quality fruit spirits distillation, is it scalable? I mean, obviously you make very small amounts and they're very sought after bottles, but is it scalable to a quality in the way that, say, whiskey is scalable to a very high quality?
It's one of these things which is incredibly challenging with fruit spirits, you know, and the reason we don't see them in the wider market a lot, because actually these end up quite often being very local spirits. And when you're kind of working in the way like we do, we're in a 7.5 square meter distillery, to put a number on it. You know, this is, the roof's pitched, I'm 6'4", so I have to bend to be in here. And we triple distill. So in that final distillation, in a 180 litre still, there can be the equivalent of 3,000 kilos worth of fruit in there. So these are not things that you can have a 2 or a 3,000 litre still of. You know, if you're working in a hyper-focused way, and there's not many people doing it, but actually working on this real level of quality, these are very finite spirits, you know, and, you know, let's put it into context. This year we worked with 8,600 kilos of raspberries, sorting them berry by berry, and that made 740 375 ml bottles. So you put that through about 6 international markets, and we're looking at 120, 130 bottles a market. And that's probably the most we'll ever be able to produce locally. And I think this is the thing, when we look at, say, rum production, if you're buying in molasses, you can have a tanker arrive, you can fill up a bulk container. Grain, it's a dry, stable material. You can have a silo. We're kind of much more closely associated with, say, a small winemaker, where you're looking at these, you know, especially if you're looking at very unusual fruits. We work with lots of indigenous plums or apples or pears. And actually the reality is that the harvest might be 1 or 2 or 3 tons. We've sourced all the quinces we can. We processed them last year. 1.3 tons will make 120 bottles. And that's because of frosts. That's all we're going to get.
And just, all those natural factors. So I think what we've learned from this, boys and girls, is that we need more people like Barney who can make fruit spirits. And actually the scale potentially is from more people investing in some of this heritage crop, of which there's plenty out there, and just sort of investing and exploring the passion. And I think that's probably potentially more where the scale can come from. Many different people trying to explore the flavors that they can generate, that they can preserve from their local environment. So now I'm being given the Windy Miller now. So this is, as I said, it was going to be a quick chat. So if you are all very keen to hear more about Barney and his processes, and they are jolly fascinating, then just make lots of noise, and we'll see if we can have a slightly longer conversation about all of this. So this is one of his glamour shots. There it is, and the Capreolus Distillery and the Garden Swift gin, a very, very good gin, I may say so as well. Now, I have been asked to make a few kind of concluding points. You're very welcome. So once this will finish, there'll be a little survey that pops up. Please, if you could fill that in, that would be incredibly helpful. And if you found this interesting, I hope you did, and you want to watch again, or you want to find out more about upcoming sessions, then please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe, or you'll get a little bit more information there. And finally, just a little plug from me, because I wrote the damn things. If you are interested in doing any of our spirits qualifications, please go to the WSET's website, WSET Global, and go to the Where to Study page, and you'll be able to find out the different providers who are offering our courses. So a huge thank you to Barney. Please do try and find out his spirits. If you can find them, just buy them. They may appear expensive, but honestly, they are worth every penny of it. Other fruit spirit distillers are available as well. Thank you very much, Barney. And thank you very much, everyone else, for listening and attending. And I hope you found this interesting and fascinating. Thank you all very much indeed.